Welcome to the Triskele podcast.
We are three druids gathered in a virtual grove
to share our thoughts and our path with you.
Hi, welcome to the Triskele podcast. This is episode 20, and today we're going to be talking about the World Tree and the Axis Mundi. But before we get into that, let's go ahead and do introductions. So my name is Victoria, and my pronouns are she and her.
I'm Drum, and my pronouns are he and him.
And I'm Amber. My pronouns are she and her.
And so for folks who are coming back and watching and listening to us repeat or again, welcome back. For people who are new, welcome to the podcast.
Hey.
Today we're going to be talking about the World Tree and the Axis Mundi. So this is certainly part of the ADF cosmology, and it's part of a lot of the different cosmologies from different practices of pagan religions. And some not so pagan religions, because trees are kind of a thing we have everywhere in the world. And it's hard not to try to ascribe some kind of spiritual meaning to these towering monstrosities. Beautiful, wonderful things. They're only monstrosities when they try to fall on your house or your car. But why don't we go ahead and talk about the Axis Mundi, the World Trees, Yggdrasil, all of the different names that apply to this sort of connective thing. What does it mean to you guys? How do you look at it? Let's just talk about what it means to you.
I know for myself, I've always had this notion of this great tree that is foundational. And the idea of this entity that has roots in the ground and branches in the sky and is here in this middle realm, it's in all the worlds. And I think there's something to be said about that. When I was a kid, I liked climbing trees. I found it, I wasn't the bravest kid, but I really found a connection, with climbing a tree. And I know that now when I do my grounding and centering meditations for my rituals or for my practices, I see myself as a tree. I'm the tree, and my feet are the proto branches, and my arms are the proto roots, and my arms are the branches. And I find it really, really important. I wrote a story about a short story one time about the first grand tree and how all other trees came from that. And I think there's something to be said about it. We're surrounded by trees. I'm a tree hugger, and I find that just the presence of trees to be really something that's kind of cool and foundational.
Well, and on top of that, like, trees are beautiful, trees are wonderful. But on top of that, if you look at the idea of the Axis Mundi, and that sacred center, a lot of times our rituals, especially now, are not performed where we're all in the same space. And so if we can tap into that idea of Axis Mundi or sacred center, I think it kind of gives us a way to all be in the same space, even though we're not physically in a shared space. So I think that it's a good way to connect to others as well as connecting to the world.
I think there's definitely something about trees and mountains and all of these sort of naturally occurring things that go deep into the ground and then rise up towering above us. It's just, I don't know. I don't really have words to describe it. I used to live in California near all of the redwoods and would go walk among the redwood trees. And being in this space where you have these natural objects, these natural beings that they dwarf you in every dimension. I mean, I have pictures of me inside a redwood tree. A fire came through and it actually burned out part of the bottom of the tree. The tree continued to live and grow and prosper, and it's a mother tree. But I was able to actually step inside of it. I mean, that's how big the tree is. It is just awe-inspiring to see these living beings that exist in our world. But the same can be said for a rock, or a big rock, obviously, or a mountain, where you have this sort of natural thing, for want of a better description, or being, that is so deeply connected to the earth beneath us, and yet reaches up into the heavens. And so I think this is really why a lot of folks sort of have this connection of the tree, or the Axis Mundi, as being that connection between the three realms, right? It exists in this middle realm. Its roots go all the way down into the earth underneath us, and its branches reach all the way up into the skies above us. And given long enough, trees will grow pretty darn tall. So, I mean, for me, it really does evoke that connection of earth and sky centered in this middle space.
Yeah, I think another thing for me is that, the idea of the roots, I see this connective sense of it, almost like, I don't want to call them rhizomes, but there's this big network of roots underground. So that when I recreate the cosmos here in Ohio, and you recreate the cosmos in Melbourne, Australia, or wherever you may be, we're recreating the cosmos. We have our world tree. They're separate in a way, but they're still, we're still recreating the cosmos together. And so I think that that's kind of a cool thing, that we can do that all at the same time, all in different places. It's very liminal and very powerful, I think, at the same time.
Well, a lot of different religions have that concept of, you create a space that is between spaces, between worlds, between time, and that in ADF we call it the sacred center. In Wiccan circles, it's often the space in the circle itself. In other traditions, they term it different things, but it's that idea of, we create this space that is connected to all of the other spaces that are like it. And I know that sort of connection, we've done ritual together, and we've done path workings together, and sort of being able to set that space really sorts of help bring everyone together. And that now makes me want to go completely, rabbit holing into a conversation on technology and what we've learned in the modern times. But we will save that for another episode.
It reminds me of, I know that you and I were at an Eight Winds festival a few years ago, and there was this like cathedral of redwood trees, where not only were these massive trees growing so tall, but they had grown in a circle. And so you walk into this circle of redwood trees. It wasn't kind of like an abstract circle, it was a circle. And you walk in there and you're surrounded by these trees, and you look up and you see this vault of the sky, through those branches. It was a powerful vision and a powerful place to be. So it was very magical. It was like Axis, multiple Axis Mundi, all at the same space. It was like a vector.
Technically, you could consider them all one, depending on.
Yes, absolutely. They were probably connected somehow.
Yes, but I think this is where science sort of enhances, at least for me, it enhances the magic and it enhances the spirituality. Because, I have a zoology degree, which includes a bit of botany, weirdly enough. And so understanding how the redwood trees grow and how they spawn and how they're basically clones of a mother tree in some ways, the fact that they all manage to grow in a circle, and that's how they grow. That's like normal. That's natural for a redwood tree. But they still do it. And that's kind of freaking amazing.
I live in Nebraska. Trees are a gift. They're not something that we just have readily available here. Trees were not native to Nebraska for at least most of the state. And so a lot of the trees that we have here are I was going to say man-made. That's not the right word. They were planted by humans. And so I think that my relationship with trees is very different than people who have spent time with redwoods. And It's a very different connection. And I think that's part of why. So I practice mostly in a Hellenic hearth, and they use the omphalos, the stone that is the navel of the world. And so for me, that makes a lot of sense and is an easier way to connect than with the tree itself, which is weird and probably a little blasphemous with an ADF, but that's
if anybody who's watched my rituals on YouTube knows that I tend to use an omphalos. I use a stone to symbolize that Axis Mundi. Indoors, it's incredibly useful.
Mm-hmm.
I used to use a silk tree until it did not survive the moves well.
Yeah,
but I think it's that connection, right? It's that connection to the navel of the earth, right? You've got this stone that could symbolize a mountain, Olympus, that is connected to the earth and also reaches up to the sky. And it's the same kind of concept of that connection between the two. Sorry, Joe.
Right. And that's absolutely the intent. It's intended to represent Olympus, and Olympus was everywhere and it was connected to everything. And, it's also a physical mountain, which has the same types of properties in the ground and sky connection that trees do. So I think that it's why we sort of lump them all together in that same category, even though from the outside they may not look the same.
Yeah, my tree is a painting of a tree.
Yeah.
It's very handy. If I want outside, it's easy to do. But no, it's nice to have different things that we can use. They don't necessarily have to be trees. And
right.
But it's nice
to have
that's
something that we emphasize. I joke about it being blasphemous with an ADF, but we talk all the time about it can be a stick. It can be, a picture. It can, whatever your representation is totally fine. But a vast majority of people do connect more with the tree than the idea of the omphalos. So,
and I think a lot of it really is what helps you sort of bring that or evoke that emotion or sensation of connection between all of the three worlds. And kind of whatever works for you, right? Like it's not, again, we're orthopraxic, not orthodoxic. You will often see in many rituals, if they're done outside, there will be a tree. I've also been in rituals where it is, it's like a palm frond or a twig with some leaves on it stuck in a pot, because that's what made sense for where you were. As long as it works to help evoke that connection, I think that's the really important part here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have something that I have at my desk, which is probably kind of dusty after a year of being away, but it is a little piece of wood, and it's literally a stick. It's just very portable and very small, and it's a great centerpiece. It is the center of things.
I have often my wooden spindles as that could be a potential portable and useful thing on all kinds of levels.
Absolutely.
On my desk, I have one of the little tiny the gem trees, the wire wraps with the little stones in it. The little teeny tiny one that sits on my desk by my computer. It serves that same purpose, in miniature.
Right. And I've seen a lot of like portable altars either have pictures like Drum has, or the tree's been wood carved into it. The other thing is the ADF Cosmology Sigil, which will appear at some point somewhere. I have no idea where. That is a representation of that same kind of concept of connection. And so I know folks who will carve that sigil either onto a piece of wood or onto a piece of stone. I have it actually hung up over by my altar that is on a piece of cloth. And that sort of does the same thing of evoking that connection for folks who know the symbology.
Yeah, I actually have that tattooed on my core.
You are always connected.
Exactly. And that was the intent. It's also the symbol that is on the front of priest stoles for ADF. And so the way that a stole is supposed to hang is down the front of your chest. the way my body is shaped is it does not hang down the front of my chest. It ends up essentially in my armpits half the time. So that's where my stole naturally hangs. So it's essentially aligned with my stole. So it is where it is on purpose.
That's neat.
Tattoos should always be on purpose.
Exactly. I mean, realistically, mythology, you look at either the tree with the realms or Greek where there's no tree.
Yeah, there were 5 sacred trees in Ireland, and they were in different locations, and they really suggested, in my opinion, a certain idea of permanence and of, it was, tradition is the semblance of permanence. And I think that what these things were is they were not only symbols of long standing, but also symbols of the families that lived there. And as things were changing in the 300 to 400 of the modern era, those trees were being cut down, and they were being cut down to interrupt that permanence or level the playing field, so to speak, and kind of, in some way, at least in the way I look at it, it was to disturb that connection between the worlds and that kind of balance that existed for a different balance or a different way. So while that wasn't just one tree, there was 5 trees. Nonetheless, I think that we see that those kind of trees, we see even here in the States where there's, the ring of the oak or whatever, all these different trees that have some central purpose and that are old and important, and people still gather around them, whether it's for religious purposes or not. I think there's that sense of awe at this really big thing. So whether it's a mountain or a dolmen or a tree, I think that those standing components symbolize that permanence.
Well, and I know in Norse mythology, there's a lot of trees in Norse mythology, which is kind of ironic if you think about Iceland. But there is the world tree, Yggdrasil, which connects all the 9 realms, and then there's the squirrel and the eagle and the stag and all of the animals that live near it and around it. But you also have a lot of stories about people being transformed into trees by the gods. And Ash and Embla, the first man and woman, according to the Norse mythologies that we have, were perhaps, we think, an ash tree and an elm tree, I think. But they were 2 trees. And that the gods breathed life into. There's stories of people being rewarded in their old age with immortality as a tree. It's just, I find it really intriguing that it's so prevalent in Iceland and in just sort of Scandinavia, where trees aren't exactly the most common thing, and there's not generally massive trees, although there are certainly some massive and ancient trees.
I think it's interesting your point about the permanence. We just had an Order of the Dead meeting recently, and we were talking, someone brought up in there that there's practices now where you can have your ashes placed inside the core of a tree. So as the tree grows, you're kind of part of that tree. And actually one of our deceased ADF priests is a part of a tree now. And so I think that's really a kind of a neat thing. It's, that idea of, trees being permanent and kind of being turned into a tree in a way. I mean, not by any divine methods, but nonetheless, what a way to go. You're a tree in the next life. I kind of like that.
And that idea of permanence really also ties into sort of the idea of the Omphalos with, I mean, I don't know what's much more permanent than a rock or a mountain.
That's very permanent.
Well, and even in Greek culture where the tree may not have been considered the sacred center, there was still a lot of mythology tied to trees in those places. I mean, the existence of dryads and how important they were to mythology and the roles they played in different myths. But also, I mean, there's myths of like Athena gifting the olive tree to a city, and how that the city thought that was so important that they made her their patron, and that it was a beautiful gift to the people, that a tree, and so even though it wasn't the sacred center, trees were still very, very important to their culture.
Especially that tree. I mean, those trees, the olive is, so immensely important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it became the basis of a lot of their economy and just sort of their general prosperity in that area, being able to produce olive oil, if I recall correctly. I'm not sure when the olives as we know them today were created, but it's always a weird thing. How do you take a fruit and decide to like kind of ruin it, but not quite ruin it, and end up with something better at the end?
Gift to the gods. That divine wisdom, that spark of wisdom. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
My brain has just run down the rabbit hole of like the fact that broccoli and cauliflower and like all of the vegetables come from the same plant. Like that's where my brain went with the whole tainted make something better to make it worse discussion.
I have a hard time separating the idea that broccoli florets are not trees. I mean, I see them as trees, so
they're kind of
they do look like little trees.
Yeah, they are little trees. The trees are used in a number of hearth cultures. I know that if I remember correctly, in the fire temples, that there's always the presence of a tree. In some of the rites, there are pieces of the trees that are used to clean some of the herbs that will become part of the offering, or the so it's something that's kind of always present. I like the notion of trees, and just I remember I went with my father in the late '90s, and we went to Brittany, and it was this Merlinic Quest of mine. My father was a great trooper, because I think he thought I was crazy, but we went to all these different Merlinic sites, and we went to this one place, and it was a set of 3 trees, and I believe that they were oak trees. Many of the oaks in the region had been cut down and chestnuts grown instead. But when you went into these trees, you could walk into the trees, and it was large enough for my father and I to stand inside. And it was like these trees were still, they still had branches and leaves on them, but they were hollow. Mm-hmm. So you would stand and you would look up from the inside of the tree, and you'd see the sky. It was this amazing thing, and just being able to touch that surface. And I think that when you touch a tree, that there's a certain sensation that goes along with it. That's my UPG, and it was just a phenomenal thing to not only be able to touch a tree from the outside, but to be able to touch a tree from the inside, and to kind of be like, for just a few moments, a part of the tree. It was really quite a sensation, and one that I think, if depending on your state of mind, if it would have been an ecstatic state, it might have been transformational or something, just to be able to interact with trees. And I know that in some of my ecstatic moments in interacting with trees, they've been fascinating, because they seem much more alive than they often are. But that's another story for another day. But,
well, I mean, if you touch a tree, you're touching a living being for the
absolutely.
most part. So,
well, and Drum says he's a tree hugger. I may actually have a picture somewhere of Drum literally hugging a tree, so he's not lying.
It's true. And my grandson likes to hug trees too, so it's a good thing.
Hugs are cool. I mean, hugs are cool. Trees are cool. Why should other things go together?
Right, absolutely. Let me grab my Ogham, which just happened to be over here. Many of the ohm that we make or runes are made from dropped trees that have fallen, or pieces that have fallen. So we feel that it's a gift that comes to us, and then we're able to, use that gift to
And
do
a quick
divination.
plug, the we that Drum is referring to is Rhiannon's Apothecary. And
Rhiannon's
the
Apothecary.
link for that in the description.
Yes.
Awesome. I have a set of runes and a set of ohm from them. Amazing. Beautiful, beautiful pieces.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So when we were looking for houses, one of the reasons that we knew that this was the house that we wanted was when we pulled up to the front yard. There's a great big tree in my front yard. And it's got 3 primary branches that are shaped like an omen, which is really cool to begin with. And then I walked around into the backyard, and there's a triangle of 3 more trees that are sitting in this big open area. And when we walked into the backyard, there was a fire pit set on one side and a bird bath set on the other. And I was like, look, someone else was here first. And so it was, for me, it was a really good sign of like, hey, maybe this should be our space. So
That's
Wall
really
tree and
cool.
fire. Yeah, beautiful.
Exactly.
And your backyard is beautiful from the video I've seen.
Thanks.
Well, I think we have come to the end of our conversation here today on the Axis Mundi and on trees in general. As you can tell, we are all fans of trees. So before we move forward, Drum, would you like to pull an omen, maybe an omen, or I don't know what you're doing actually today.
I am doing omen with Ogham. So it's O. So here we go. I'll pull all 3 and then I'll talk about them. Ooh.
I feel like there should be some music in the background here. I would sing a certain tune that's in my head, but I don't want to get in trouble.
So before you start talking, the one that's in my head is, oh, it's magic. That's
Absolutely.
5 seconds or
because
less.
he said, oh. I was like, yes. Sorry, continue.
Okay, the first ogham is it's the Yew Tree, so Ida or Ioho, and it means rebirth and everlasting. So it's the end of in my opinion, it's the end of a considerable cycle of some years, and it says that some things come to an end, and then they come back again. So I think that we may find ourselves in these days in a time of cyclical ends and cyclical beginnings. Hopefully COVID is coming to a cyclical end. But the other thing is, as the first ogham and the first draw in this, I tend to look at it as perhaps a connection in ADF to the ancestors. So rebirth and everlasting really makes a lot of sense, that the ancestors are kind of reborn. What's remembered lives, and I think as we remember the ancestors and we celebrate them, and with them, that they stay with us. The second ogham is Koad, which is the grove. And the grove is a collection of all trees. And if this is the nature spirits, how very perfect it is. And it's the collection of trees and all knowledge. So in this sense, the trees are not only an arboreal kind of creature, but also a collection of wisdom, that they maintain this kind of knowledge. And for me, the nature spirits remind us and teach us about the cycles in our lives. So that storehouse of knowledge that they always remind us to look to the cycles in our lives is reminded to us in this poem. And finally, we have Gort, the ivy. Hi, ivy. And so the ivy is tenacious and seeks the center and looks to find its way into places. And it looks to find its way into places because it seeks to find the knowledge within. And I think that if this is a corollary for the Shining Ones, for our gods and goddesses, it's that they are telling us to look within for the insights inside of ourselves. These are insights that come to us just from the world around us and from the presence of the Shining Ones in our world. So I think for the next couple weeks, remember the ancestors and remember that they're always with us and that their worlds intersect with ours. Remember the trees and the forests around you, the collection of forests and the collection of wisdom that is this earth that is still alive and vibrant and telling us things. And while we sense the gods around us always, remember that the gods are in us as well. And so look within that center and find the gods within. That's what I see for this next 2 weeks.
That sounds like a good reminder. All right, well, thank you all for joining us and watching or listening to us today. We will see you all in a couple of weeks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining us for today's video. If you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. You can also find more episodes on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. You can find us on social media on Facebook and Twitter, or for more information, visit our website, triskelepodcast.weebly.com.